"If you can't afford the things I want," my husband said, standing in the kitchen with shopping bags at his feet, "then at least stay out of my way." 7 years of marriage, and that was how he spoke to me. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I looked at him, felt something inside me go very quiet, and answered with a single word. "Sure." He blinked. He was clearly expecting a fight, a lecture, another round of me explaining budgets, responsibilities, repairs we needed to pay for. When none of that came, he scoffed, grabbed his keys, and left the house, probably to show off his new purchases to friends who already thought he deserved more. I stood there alone in the kitchen, staring at the counter where he'd dropped over $1,000 worth of designer items without a second thought. And that was the moment I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see for a long time. This wasn't about money. It was about respect, and I didn't have it anymore. I went to my home office and closed the door. I sat there for 20 minutes, not angry, not crying, just thinking. Then I started making phone calls. By the time my husband came home that night, the living room was unrecognizable. No couch, no coffee table, no entertainment center, just empty space and an echo where our life used to be. In the exact center of the cleared room sat one suitcase, a suitcase he had never seen before. When he stepped inside and read the name on the luggage tag, he stopped short, like the floor had shifted under his feet. I was 36 years old, and 3 months ago, I learned something that changed everything. Sometimes the best response to disrespect isn't a fight. It's silence and action. I was 36 when everything finally snapped into focus, but the truth is, the story started years earlier, back when I still believed love was supposed to feel like compromise instead of erosion. My husband and I met in our late 20s, not in some dramatic, movie-worthy way. Through mutual friends at a casual gathering, the kind where conversations are easy and expectations are low. He was confident, ambitious, the type of man who talked about goals and success as if they were guarantees instead of possibilities. I was drawn to that certainty. At the time, it felt reassuring. We dated for 2 years before getting married. Those years were fine, comfortable, predictable. We didn't fight much, and when we did, it was usually about small things that resolved quickly, or so I thought. Looking back, most disagreements ended not because we reached understanding, but because I backed down first. After the wedding, we leaned hard into what people like to call the suburban dream: a house with a mortgage, 2 cars, decent jobs, stability. On paper, we looked successful. I worked in supply chain management. Nothing glamorous, nothing that turned heads at dinner parties, but steady. Good benefits, reliable income. The kind of job that keeps the lights on and the future predictable. I took pride in that. He worked in marketing at a boutique firm, made slightly less than I did, but you'd never know it from the way he talked. Appearances mattered to him, a lot. Clothes, restaurants, vacations, who we were seen with, what people assumed about our lifestyle. At first, the money comments were subtle. He'd mention how one of his friends' husbands had just bought a new car, or how another couple went on some extravagant vacation. He'd laugh when he said it, like it was just idle conversation. I brushed it off, figured he was venting, comparing, like people do sometimes. I told myself it didn't matter. But over time, those comments changed tone. They stopped being observations and started feeling like measurements, benchmarks I was being quietly compared against. Every "must be nice" came with an unspoken implication. Every story about someone else's lifestyle landed like a reminder of what I wasn't providing. We still functioned well on the surface, paid bills, hosted dinners, talked about renovations and future plans, but underneath something was shifting. Conversations about money became more frequent, more pointed, less about us and more about what he felt entitled to. And the worst part was how normal it all felt while it was happening. I didn't see it as disrespect yet. I saw it as pressure, as stress, as ambition taken a little too far. I told myself marriage meant weathering phases, that this was just one of them. What I didn't realize was that, little by little, I was being reduced to a function, a provider, a means to an image. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more comfortable he became saying things that should have stopped me cold. By the time that Tuesday afternoon arrived, the foundation had already been cracked for a long time. I just hadn't stepped on the fault line yet. The shift didn't announce itself with one explosive argument. It crept in quietly, disguised as commentary, comparison, and expectations that slowly stopped being shared and started being imposed. At first, it was just remarks. Casual, almost harmless on the surface. He'd scroll through social media and say things like, "Wow, look at this. Mark just surprised his wife with a weekend in Napa." Or, "I ran into Jenna today. Her husband just got promoted again. They're looking at buying a second place." He'd say it lightly, but then glance at me, waiting, measuring my reaction. I learned to smile and nod. When I tried to bring conversations back to our reality, upcoming repairs, savings goals, responsibilities, he'd sigh and say I was being negative, that I was always thinking small, that if I were more ambitious, more driven, we wouldn't have to worry about things like budgets. "You think too practically," he told me once. "That's why we're stuck where we are." That one stung, even though I didn't say anything. Over the past year, the comments sharpened. Every dinner out came with a critique. The restaurant wasn't nice enough. The service wasn't impressive. The crowd wasn't our level. Vacation stopped being about rest and started being about optics, photos, stories to tell, proof that we were doing better than others. And slowly the blame began to shift toward me. He started framing his dissatisfaction as something I was responsible for fixing. If I made more money, if I pushed harder, if I were more aggressive in my career, we wouldn't be having these conversations. Never mind that my job paid more than his. Never mind that I handled most of the financial planning, the long-term thinking, the unglamorous but necessary parts of our life. Whenever I tried to push back, he'd accuse me of being defensive. "I'm not attacking you," he'd say. "I'm just being honest." Honesty became his shield, a way to say hurtful things and then step back, hands clean, as if intention erased impact. His friends reinforced it. Couples we saw socially talked openly about money in ways that felt competitive instead of practical. Jokes about settling or marrying potential. I noticed how comfortable he was in those conversations, how easily he laughed along, how rarely he defended me or our choices. At family gatherings, it was subtler, but just as present. His parents praised our stability, but always followed it with comments about how hard it must be to live within a budget. His mother once asked if I'd ever considered switching careers to something with more upside. I laughed politely, even as something inside me tightened. The more these moments accumulated, the more I found myself shrinking, editing my words, avoiding certain topics, taking on extra mental load just to prevent another comparison, another disappointment. And still, I told myself this was normal, that marriages evolve, that stress changes people. But deep down, a quiet question had started to form, one I was afraid to ask out loud. When did love turn into a performance review? By the time that Tuesday afternoon arrived, the tension was already thick between us. We'd been circling the same arguments for months, never resolving them, just postponing the next round. I didn't know it yet, but that day wasn't going to add another crack. It was going to expose the whole fracture. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary day that usually slips by without leaving a mark. I had taken the day off to handle errands and deal with a roof repair estimate that had been sitting on our kitchen counter for weeks. The house was quiet when I heard the front door open earlier than expected. He walked in carrying several glossy shopping bags, designer logos practically shouting from across the room. He dropped them on the kitchen counter with a satisfied thud, already reaching for his phone as if documenting the moment mattered more than sharing it with me. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched him line the bags up neatly, like trophies. Finally, I asked, keeping my voice neutral, "Did we talk about this purchase?" He rolled his eyes immediately. "Here we go, another lecture about money." "I'm not lecturing," I said. "I'm asking if we discuss spending over $1,000 when we're supposed to be saving for the roof." "God, you're so cheap," he snapped. "My friends don't need permission slips from their wives to buy nice things." "It's not about permission," I replied. "It's about communication. We have a joint account. Big purchases should be discussed." That's when he turned on me fully. His face flushed, his voice rising with a kind of anger that felt practiced. "You know what your problem is," he said. "You can't afford the lifestyle I deserve. I'm tired of living like we're broke when we're not." "We're not broke," I said carefully. "But we're not rich either. We have responsibilities." He didn't hesitate. "If you can't afford the things I want, then at least stay out of my way." The words landed heavier than he probably intended, or maybe exactly as heavy as he meant them to. 7 years of marriage reduced to a single command: stay out of my way. I stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel heartbreak. What I felt was clarity, sharp and cold. Sure, I said. He blinked, clearly thrown off. Sure, that's it? Yep, I replied. I'll stay out of your way. He scoffed, grabbed his keys, and left the house, probably to show off his purchases to people who already believed he deserved more. I watched his car pull out of the driveway, then went into my home office and closed the door. I sat at my desk for about 20 minutes, doing nothing but thinking. Then I started making phone calls. By the time the sun went down, decisions had been made that couldn't be undone. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because something fundamental had finally been said out loud, and I refused to pretend I hadn't heard it. When he came home that night, the house no longer looked the same, and neither did our marriage. I didn't rush into anything after he left that afternoon. I didn't pace the house or rehearse arguments in my head. I stayed in my office, staring at the wall, letting the sentence echo until it lost its power to shock me. Stay out of my way. It wasn't said in anger. That was the part that mattered most. It was said like a conclusion he'd already reached, like an assessment he felt entitled to make after years of quietly tallying my worth against his expectations. That realization hurt more than the words themselves. After about 20 minutes, I picked up my phone and made my first call. A divorce attorney. I didn't dramatize it. I simply asked for a consultation. When she offered an appointment the next morning, I said yes, without hesitation. Hanging up, I felt strangely steady, like I'd stepped onto solid ground after standing too long on something unstable. The second call was to my brother. He lived 2 states away and had a spare room. I told him I might need a place to stay for a bit. He didn't ask why. He didn't tell me to reconsider. He just said, "You're always welcome." That was all I needed. The third call was to my bank. I opened a new individual account and transferred exactly half of our joint savings into it. Not a dollar more, not a dollar less. I wasn't trying to punish him or hide anything. I was protecting myself and keeping everything clean. 7 years of marriage deserved fairness, even if respect had disappeared. Then I started packing. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, personal documents, my laptop, items I'd brought into the marriage. I worked methodically, room by room, as if I were following instructions instead of dismantling my life. I left the shared furniture untouched, the decorations, the things he cared about. I wasn't interested in debating ownership later. The living room was the last place I stood for a moment. That oversized sectional couch he'd insisted on buying the year before, the one I'd hated from the start. Too big, too modern, too expensive. I made one more call and scheduled a charity pickup for the next afternoon. I told them to take the couch, the coffee table, the entertainment center, everything he'd insisted we have. By the time I finished, it was after 9. The house echoed when I walked through it, like it already knew what was coming. I pulled a suitcase from the guest room closet, one he'd never seen before. Plain black, hard shell. I packed it carefully with all the designer purchases from that afternoon, the receipts, and every credit card statement from the past year with his spending highlighted. On top, I placed a folder with the divorce papers I'd received earlier and signed. I clipped a note to the front. Since I can't afford your lifestyle and should stay out of your way, I'm doing exactly that. I set the suitcase in the center of the empty living room and attached a luggage tag with his full name on it. Then I picked up my bags and left. I didn't feel dramatic driving away. I felt finished. I checked into a small hotel 15 minutes away and sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, phone face down on the nightstand. I didn't feel the urge to text anyone. I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. The quiet felt earned. At 10:34 p.m., my phone started vibrating. I didn't answer. He called again, and again. 7 missed calls in less than 10 minutes. Then the texts began. "Where are you? What the hell did you do to the living room? Is this a joke? Call me right now." I waited an hour, long enough for the panic to crest. Then I sent a single message. "Read the note. My attorney will be in touch." He called immediately. I declined. He called again. I declined again. Then he switched tactics and left a voicemail. "Baby, please," he said, voice suddenly soft, almost tender. I didn't mean what I said. I was stressed. "Work's been crazy. I took it out on you. Please come home. We can talk this out." I deleted it without responding. The next morning, my attorney called. "Your husband contacted my office at 8, she said. Demanded to speak with me. I explained I represent you and advised him to retain his own counsel. He was upset." Around noon, I got a text from his best friend. "She's devastated," the message read. "How could you just leave without talking to her?" I replied once. He told me to stay out of his way because I couldn't afford his lifestyle. I'm respecting his wishes. There was no response to that. By day 3, the charity had picked up the furniture. I'd given them the garage code so they could access the house while he was at work. That evening, he texted me a photo of the living room. Bare floor, empty walls, the suitcase still centered like a punctuation mark. "You're a coward," he wrote. "A real woman would face me." I answered calmly. "A real woman doesn't stay where she's not wanted or respected. Enjoy the space." Week 2 is when things turned ugly. He hired an aggressive attorney who sent a letter demanding I return to the marital home and reimburse him for the furniture I'd stolen. My attorney responded with donation receipts showing the furniture had been purchased on his credit cards and donated under his name. Clean, legal, documented. The demand evaporated. They tried another angle: abandonment, emotional distress, financial vulnerability. My attorney replied with bank statements showing he had his own income, his own credit cards, and access to exactly half of the marital savings. She included a spreadsheet documenting over $30,000 in his personal spending in the last year alone. That shut things down, briefly. Then the calls from unknown numbers started. Crying voicemails, promises to change, requests for counseling. My attorney advised me to keep everything and engage with nothing. One Friday night, he showed up at my extended stay hotel. I saw him through the peephole, dressed carefully, hair done, trying to look like the man I'd married. "I know you're in there," he said. "Please, 5 minutes." "Talk to my attorney," I said through the door. "We're married," he insisted. "We owe each other more than this." "We were married when you told me to stay out of your way," I replied. That ended it. He cried, asked for counseling, promised to change. I didn't open the door. "I don't want you to change," I said. "I want to be free." "You're throwing away 7 years over one argument." "It wasn't one argument," I said. "It was years of being told I wasn't enough. I finally listened." He left. I heard him crying down the hallway. And for the first time since I walked out, I slept through the night. The quiet after he left the hotel hallway was heavier than anything that had come before it. Not because I missed him, but because there was nothing left to distract me from the reality of what I'd done. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar sounds, the hum of the air conditioner, the occasional footsteps outside my door, and for the first time since the argument, doubt crept in. 7 years is a long time. It's long enough to blur lines, long enough to make you question whether standing up for yourself is strength or stubbornness. I found myself replaying moments from our marriage that had nothing to do with money. Lazy Sunday mornings, road trips, inside jokes that no one else understood. The version of him who could be generous, funny, attentive when he wanted to be. And the most dangerous thought of all surfaced quietly. Maybe I overreacted. I imagined opening the door that night, letting him in, sitting on the edge of the bed while he apologized again, promised therapy, promised change. I imagined the relief of not being the woman who gave up on her marriage, the relief of letting things slide back into place, even if they never felt quite right again. That was the lowest point. Not anger, not heartbreak, self-betrayal hovering just within reach. Then another memory cut through it. The way he said it, "Stay out of my way." Not yelled, not said in the heat of the moment, said like a fact. I realized that if I went back, nothing fundamental would change. The tone might soften, the words might improve, but the belief underneath would stay the same, that my value was conditional, that respect was tied to what I could provide, that love was something I had to earn repeatedly and could lose the moment I disappointed him. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, not from fear, but from clarity. If I went back now, I wouldn't be choosing love. I would be choosing comfort over truth, familiar pain over unfamiliar peace. And worse than losing my marriage would be losing myself after finally seeing what was happening. I cried then, quietly. Not for him, but for the years I'd spent shrinking my expectations, justifying behavior that left me feeling smaller, telling myself that this was what commitment looked like. By morning, my eyes were swollen, my body exhausted, but my decision felt solid again. The darkest moment wasn't when I left him. It was realizing how close I came to staying. And once I understood that, I knew the next step wouldn't be about survival. It would be about reclaiming my life. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks or a dramatic declaration. It came quietly the next morning, when I woke up and realized I wasn't bracing myself anymore. I stood by the window of the hotel room with a cup of coffee I barely tasted, watching traffic move below, People going to work, starting their days, living lives that didn't revolve around proving their worth to someone else. And for the first time in years, I felt something settle inside me. Acceptance. Not acceptance of the divorce, acceptance of the truth. I wasn't ending my marriage because of one argument about money. I was ending it because that argument exposed the lens through which he saw me. A lens where my value was measured by what I could fund, how well I stayed quiet, how easily I stepped aside when his wants took center stage. Later that morning, my attorney called again. Her voice was calm, businesslike. "We're in a strong position," she said, "but I want to be clear with you. This may get messy before it gets better." "I'm ready," I replied, and meant it. That afternoon, I moved into an extended stay place and forwarded my mail. I updated my address everywhere it mattered. I stopped thinking of myself as someone temporarily displaced and started thinking of myself as someone in transition. There's a difference. One implies loss, the other implies direction. I also did something small but symbolic. I took off my wedding ring. I hadn't realized how heavy it felt until it wasn't on my finger anymore, not just physically, but emotionally. I placed it in a small box and slid it into my bag, not with anger, not with ceremony, just acknowledgement. When he tried calling again from a new number that evening, I didn't feel the familiar jolt of anxiety. I felt distance, healthy, necessary distance. That's when I understood where my power actually was. It wasn't in arguing better. It wasn't in proving him wrong. It wasn't in convincing him to respect me. My power was in refusing to negotiate my dignity. From that point on, everything became procedural: attorneys, documents, timelines, evidence. Not because I was cold, but because I was clear. The emotional chaos he kept trying to pull me back into no longer had access to me. I wasn't punishing him. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was choosing myself with the same decisiveness I'd once reserved for protecting the marriage. And once that choice was made, there was no going back. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in waves, each one trying a different angle, each one meant to pull me back into a version of the marriage that no longer existed. Week 2 was when his attorney entered the picture, an aggressive family law lawyer with a reputation for intimidation. The first letter accused me of abandoning the marital home and demanded that I return immediately, along with compensation for the furniture I had stolen. My attorney responded the same day, attaching donation receipts from the charity pickup. The furniture had been purchased on his credit cards, donated under his name, with documentation. Legal, clean, final. That line of attack ended quickly, so they tried another one. Emotional distress, financial vulnerability, claims that I'd left him unable to maintain the lifestyle we had built. My attorney countered with bank statements, pay stubs, and a breakdown of our finances showing he earned a salary, had access to half the marital savings, and had spent over $30,000 on personal purchases in the last year alone. The implication was clear. He wasn't vulnerable. He was entitled. That's when the tone changed. By week 3, the calls started again. Unknown numbers, voicemails left late at night, crying, apologies, promises of counseling, promises to change. I didn't respond to any of them. My attorney advised me to save everything and engage with nothing. Then he crossed another line. One Friday night, he showed up at the extended stay hotel where I was staying. I recognized him immediately through the peephole. He'd dressed carefully, hair styled, clothes chosen to remind me of the man I'd married, not the one who told me to stay out of his way. "I know you're in there," he said softly through the door. "Please, 5 minutes." "Talk to my attorney," I said, my voice steady. "I can't do this through lawyers," he replied. "We're married. We owe each other more than this." "We were married when you told me to stay out of your way," I said. "That marriage ended right there." He cried, asked for counseling, said he was angry and didn't mean it, promised to be better, to appreciate me, to change. "I don't want you to change," I said. "I want to be free." "You're throwing away 7 years over one argument." "It wasn't one argument," I replied. "It was years of being told I wasn't enough." I finally listened. He stood there for a long moment, then left. I heard him crying as he walked down the hallway. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. In the second month, his attorney contacted mine with a new claim. He was now alleging that the house we owned together had been purchased primarily with funds from his parents. $40,000, supposedly gifted solely to him. I actually laughed when my attorney told me. "That's not true," I said. "We each put in $20,000. I have bank statements from my savings account." He did too. When pressed for proof, the claim started to unravel. First it was 40,000, then 20, then 15, then finally 5,000. A vague email from his mother surfaced, conveniently unspecific, talking about helping our son buy a house. No checks, no wires, no documentation. The judge took note. Inconsistent claims, unsubstantiated assertions, credibility damaged. Then came the call that changed everything. My attorney called one Thursday evening. Remember the fraud alert you mentioned? The $600 charge after you separated? Yes, I said. The credit card company did a full audit after you reported it. They flagged 4 additional charges over the past 6 months, all at stores he frequented, all during times you were at work. Total is just under $3,000. My stomach dropped. He'd been stealing from me. The card was in my name only, from before we were married. He'd kept the information and used it quietly, consistently, while telling me I didn't make enough money for his lifestyle. The credit card company asked if I wanted to press charges. I sat in silence for a long moment. Yes, I said finally. File the report. His attorney panicked, called mine immediately, offering repayment, calling it a misunderstanding. My attorney told them it was too late. The report had been filed. It was out of our hands. He called me directly for the first time in weeks, crying, hysterical. How could you do this to me? I could lose my job. You stole from me for 6 months, I said. This is the consequence. The divorce finalized shortly after. The judge ruled a clean 50-50 split of marital assets, but included a formal note in the final order documenting his pattern of financial deception and misconduct. That note would follow him, permanently. He had to sell the house, couldn't afford the mortgage alone. We each walked away with about $42,000 after closing costs. I used mine as a down payment on a small condo. He downsized. Then came the final blow. About a month later, I received an email from one of his coworkers. She explained that he'd been fired from his marketing job after an internal audit uncovered inflated expense reports spanning nearly 2 years. About $12,000 siphoned off. He was terminated, ordered to repay the money. Legal action threatened. The same pattern, different victim. His social media went dark. The designer lifestyle disappeared. Last I heard, he was working part-time retail while dealing with the legal fallout. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt finished. 3 months later, the divorce was final. No dramatic courtroom scenes. No last-minute confessions. Just paperwork, signatures, and a judge who looked tired of entitlement dressed up as ambition. The ruling was clean. A straight 50-50 split of marital assets. But what stayed with me wasn't the money. It was the language the judge used in the final order. A formal note documenting my husband's pattern of financial deception and misconduct. Permanent. On record. Something no amount of confidence or posturing could erase. He had to sell the house. He couldn't afford the mortgage on his own. I didn't want it anyway. Too many memories attached to rooms where I'd learned to stay quiet. After closing costs, we each walked away with about $42,000. I used mine as a down payment on a small condo across town. Nothing flashy, just peaceful. Mine. A month after everything was finalized, I got an email from one of his coworkers. We'd met a few times at company events. The subject line read, "Thought you should know." She explained that he'd been fired, not because of the divorce, not because of the credit card fraud, but because his company had audited expense reports after an anonymous tip. Nearly 2 years of inflated claims. About $12,000 pocketed. Same pattern. Different target. Reading that email didn't make me feel triumphant. It made me feel validated. For so long, I'd questioned my instincts, wondered if I was too sensitive, too practical, too unwilling to dream bigger. Turns out I wasn't imagining the gaps. I was just the first one to stop covering them. These days, my life is quieter. I wake up in a space that reflects me. Furniture I actually like. No echoes of someone else's dissatisfaction hanging in the air. I got a small promotion at work last month. Nothing dramatic, but it came with a raise and more autonomy. I started dating again, slowly. I met someone through a friend. She's a teacher, drives a sensible car, splits checks without making it a statement. When she came over for the first time, she complimented how cozy my place felt instead of asking what I planned to upgrade next. That's when it really hit me. Love isn't supposed to feel like a transaction. Marriage isn't supposed to be a performance review. And respect isn't something you earn by funding someone else's lifestyle. The suitcase in the empty living room wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I gave my husband exactly what he asked for: space, all his things, and a life where I was no longer in his way. When someone tells you to step aside because you're not enough, believe them the first time, not because they're right, but because they've just revealed how they see you. Walking away wasn't cruelty. It wasn't impulsive. It was self-respect, finally acted on. And I learned something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. If someone only values you for what you provide, the moment you stop providing, you'll see the truth. Silence and action don't just end a marriage. Sometimes they save a person.